Hi, my name's Chloe. I'm a teacher and I'm here today to talk to you about how we can use data-informed practice with Edrolo. So firstly, we need to talk about what actually are we talking about. So when we're talking about data-informed practice, we're talking about how we can use both formative and summative data to gauge our students' progress and then make some plans for what we need to do for their next steps. I think focusing on formative assessment here is probably the most useful. All right, so why would we do this? Well, using lots of this data, particularly from those formative assessments, is going to help us to understand exactly where our students are at, where the knowledge gaps are that they currently have, and where they might need or some extension. It's going to help us to make sure that we differentiate accordingly for our classes to make sure that everyone in our class is going to improve in their learning outcomes. So before we move on and look at some examples, I just want to direct you to the additional resources button at the bottom of this video, where you'll be able to find a knowledge bank article that will give you some more information about how to do this, and also a link to our blog where you'll find lots of information on pedagogy and how to implement best practice in your classroom using Edrolo. All right, for our first example, we're going to look at the class progress dash and look at how we can use this data to plan our next steps for our class. So I'm going to jump into one of the class progress tabs here, and I can see that my students have accessed this video content and have completed most of it. And then I get a bit of an overview of how they've gone. So I can order this by content viewed, so I can see who's done their homework and who hasn't. I can order this by their quiz scores on the multiple choice questions that they've done here, and also how they've self-rated on a scale of 1 to 5. So that's their understanding. Self-reflection. What I recommend looking at is both the self-ratings and also how they've gone in those questions. It's a really good indication that something might be a bit off when those two numbers don't really add up. So for example, we've got a student up here who's rating 5 out of 5. This second student, in fact, has gotten both of those multiple choice questions wrong, and yet they're indicating that they're so confident that they could teach someone else. It could be that they've watched the video solution and they actually do know where they went wrong. It could mean that maybe they still hold a misconception that's worth addressing. So exercise your teacher judgment here and, you make the decisions about what you think is best to do there. You can also see that particularly that second question, half of the class got that correct, the other half didn't. So that could be a question that you decide to click into and then go back over with, project that on the wall and discuss that with your students so that they don't make that same mistake moving forward. For our second example, we're going to look at how we can use the textbook questions dash to make some informed decisions about what to do next. So I'm just going to jump into 1B here, and you can see where I hit view questions is where I'll be able to see my students' responses and see what work they've completed. So after they've attempted some of these questions, you'll get an overview of all of the questions on this first page. And then you'll be able to click in and you'll be able to see your students' answers. If you identify any trends, perhaps in incorrect answers, this is where you'll be able to do that individually. Particularly for short answer questions, this is a better place to look. I'll just show you what a short answer question looks like, and you'll be able to see their written responses there. So you might like to have a bit of a scan through and see, is there a misconception that's quite common across the class that I might need to address? Or if it's just with a small group of students, you might decide to do some differentiated instruction just with them. If you want to get a little bit more of an overview of the data as a whole, from that landing page, you can hit view responses and then you'll get a data grid. This grid gives you an overview of what your students have completed overall. So you can see it's broken down into theory review, preparation for exams, etc. I like to filter this, and you'll see that I've toggled off the correct answers because I find that just messes up the way that I view the data, and I like to just have incorrect responses on. If we look at this, you can see I can still see all of those multiple choice responses, and it's probably much easier for me to identify any trends in incorrect answers here. You'll see here for question 4, a lot of students actually incorrectly answered B. So that's probably going to be a misconception that I can address with my whole class. When we look at short answer questions, they're not automatically marked, but your students will have the opportunity to self-reflect and identify to you, do I need help or am I feeling confident with this content? And that's indicated by the red and the green. If you wanted to see how students have gone, again, look at that question overview, or we can jump into a question here if we know that that's been a source of challenge for our students. And again, we could project this and go back over it with the whole class if that's the need, or again, do some more targeted differentiated instruction with smaller groups or individual students. For example 3, we're going to look at the progress check and test submissions dash and look at how we can use that data to plan forward. So please make sure that your students have completed these before you go looking for any data, otherwise you won't find anything there. And in order for your students to access it, they need to be unlocked. If I lock that, my students won't be able to go in. You'll then be able to hit the submissions and get an overview of data across your class. So if we look here, you'll see I've got lots of data. I have some very good students in this class. And I like to scroll down and have a look at this graph. This is going to give me the class average per question. And you can see where I've got those extreme dips are probably areas that I'm going to choose to focus on with my class. All of those multiple choice questions do get automatically marked, so your students will get instant feedback on those, but they will be prompted to self-mark for the other questions. So if I look here, I can see this question, which is question 3, multiple choice, quite a lot of incorrect answers. And if I go through, a lot of students seem to have answered A. So there's probably a common misconception that I can address across the class. And if I click into that video, you'll see that I could project that and then address that again with my whole class. If you had a fewer number of students, you could also do some differentiated instruction with groups. For our short answer questions, I'm going to use this last question as an example. You can see your class averages are also listed at the top here, and I've got 35.3% students who got that correct. So we're not doing too well there. Again, I could get those students into small groups or do this with my whole class because it seems to be quite a widespread issue, and identify those misconceptions by going back over that question or planning some different activities moving forward. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit how we can use data. Now, I know that sometimes having all of this data can be really overwhelming. We can be like, oh God, there's so many things to look at here. I don't really know where to start or how to unpack this. What do I do next? So what I've done is I've taken some data from a progress check or a topic test, and I'm going to show you how we can use that to help differentiate in our class. So this is called a differentiation diamond, and it's a way that we can start to separate our students into different tiers or groups so that we can then differentiate our instruction further. In the middle, we've got our students who are part of our core differentiated instruction, and that's probably where we're targeting a lot of our teaching to because that's going to make up the majority of your class. Whereas out in tier 2, we've got students who need some differentiation, whether that's at an intervention level or at an enrichment level. And then out at tier 3, these are our students who need the most differentiated tasks, whether that's intensive intervention or intensive enrichment. So what we've got here is we've pulled our data, and I'm going to get us to focus here on the percentages. So that's like the percentage for this progress check or topic test. I might then look at this and go, okay, well, roughly where does the majority of my class sit as part of my core differentiated instruction? And I might start putting students into those groups. You might write your names across, or you might be like me and like to use arrows. I can then go ahead and go, okay, which of these students might need some enrichment? So I know that this student here definitely needs some enrichment, whereas this last student needs intensive enrichment. I then might say, okay, well, this student here, they're roughly sitting in the center of what I might call my core differentiated instruction, but using my teacher judgment, I might know that that student actually needs some intervention. They've just worked really hard and we're starting to see that improvement, but I might know that they're not ready yet to move on to some more challenging tasks. I might still need to give them that differentiated work. So I'm going to put them in this group. And then we might have something that looks like this. So just be mindful that when you're doing this, it's not like a one size fits all. We do this once and that's it. This is where our class sits. Obviously, this is going to be ever changing, whether that's between different topics, different areas of study, or even just week by week. Like our students struggle with different things. It could be key terms, for example, that really pull some of our students up. So keep that in mind and always use your teacher judgment, and then you can plan your differentiated tasks for those student groups from there.